like a link to the book?
Yeah, I've got that here. Yeah.
I'm going to send it out tomorrow.
It doesn't. The link doesn't seem to show the chapter, like the contents. I don't know if I'm just not looking properly, but it just has a description and then it has the 3 chapters, but it doesn't show the contents. But I can show that by showing my screen. Like maybe.
Yeah.
I think at one point that link did have the list of contents, but it doesn't seem to at the moment, unless I'm not looking at it properly.
Yeah, I don't.
Wait, Dora, did you definitely send it to Vanessa? I've got her on the. Yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't have.
Is it the same one? Is it the same one as you sent me?
No, everybody has their own. I'll resend it.
It's all individualized. Would you mind sending it again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll send it to her other email address.
Wait, she's going to send you.
Wait, which email address does she want it at?
Which email? Do you want it to the Gmail or to the Cambridge?
On spam, maybe.
Whichever. Doesn't matter.
So I sent it to Cambridge. I'll send it now to her Gmail.
She's going to send it to your Gmail, Vanessa. C'est bon? Yalla. Okay. I did. Bye. Okay. Hello.
Hi, I'm Ronnie. Good to meet you guys.
Oh, yay. Okay.
Hi. Yeah. You were in the middle of something technical, so I didn't want to get in the middle. Really nice to meet you. You guys are doing amazing work. Wow, fascinating. Really fascinating. So thank you. Thanks for coming on.
So we said even if we have a small group tonight, but we discussed posting it afterwards so that people would have more. It seems like people didn't work with the timing or something. So they'll be able to watch it afterwards and they'll be able to see the link afterwards, etc.
I think that's great. It has a life of its own. And I think a lot of people have their minds in a lot of places right now, including you, Dora.
Well, yeah, we were talking about that too.
How are you doing?
Oh, hi, Vanessa. So you did get it. I thought you didn't get it.
I did get in. Yeah, I have too many email addresses and too many inboxes.
That's it. That's why I asked what Gmail to send it to.
I was looking in one, I was like, oh my gosh, where it's not here. Then, so I'm sorry for the last minute panic.
I don't panic. And there are so many other things to panic about. This is just not one of them. Sorry.
Exactly.
So I did open it, just so you know. We'll see.
I haven't seen you, Ronnie, in such a long time. It's great.
Too long, Vanessa. I mean, I've seen you on this sort of thing.
Yeah, I know. And on this, right?
Yeah. And I show my students your stuff, so I get to see you that way too. But
yeah,
it's been long time. Yeah. How are your folks here?
They're well. They're in New Mexico. They're not moving. We've had the conversation like it would be great to see each other, but do we dare?
Right.
So,
I mean, you're vaccinated, I assume, in England, no?
I have one vaccine, though.
Oh, okay.
And your kids aren't getting vaccinated anytime soon.
No.
Right. Although here already they've dropped it to 12.
I saw
Yeah, but
that.
you're so young.
School is doing a pop-up vaccination for 12-year-olds, 12 to 15-year-olds. Yeah, it's like so. Yeah.
I'm hoping that it's supposed to open in Israel by the end of the month for 12 to 15-year-olds.
Oh, wow.
It really changes everything. It's amazing. Yeah, I had my parents come to me for Pesach, because they got vaccinated before.
Yeah.
My mom wasn't going to get vaccinated. She was scared of it and whatever. And my dad put his foot down. He said, we need to go to them for Pesach, and we're not going to go for Pesach if you get this vaccine. So
excellent.
Yeah, it worked.
Good.
Yeah. So all three of you are in Cambridge? Is that what I understood, or I didn't read carefully? Vanessa, Sami, and Rebekah, and you guys are in Cambridge together, or no? All different
Rebekah's in
places.
London.
Yeah, I'm in London. Well, I'm actually in Durham at the moment, but I'm based at Queen Mary in London.
Okay.
And
Is that
David, where are you
everything?
based?
I'm in Geneva.
Oh,
So that's why you haven't done it.
You know the Frisco Kid. You know the movie The Frisco Kid.
yeah.
One of the great Jewish American masterpieces with Gene Wilder. Oh, so it's
Of course.
it's a must. It's really it's actually a brilliant, fascinating movie on many levels. But yeah, he sent with a Sefer Torah from Poland to San Francisco, and he sent because he's the biggest schlemazel, as they say, in the yeshiva, and they figured, well, we can send him. We don't lose anything by sending him, and he doesn't know where he's going. And he says to someone in the yeshiva, "Where is San Francisco?" And they say, "Oh, it's by New York." So sometimes when there's some place you think it's by New York. So yeah. Yeah, I highly recommend
there are
it,
a lot
actually.
of great scenes.
Gene Wilder is just a genius, and the movie was done with a lot. Yeah, it's a fascinating American artifact. Yeah.
Yeah, the collapsing of geographies, according to your perspective.
Sure. Sure.
So Rebecca, I found it like on a university website thing. So I can share and you can speak to it. That might help.
You're on mute.
Sorry, Liverpool University Press one.
Yeah,
Or was
yeah,
it in-
the electronic version.
Oh, okay.
And Rebecca, I have an image from Jerome's film. It's the poster, but it has the guys, playing the violin. So I thought that would be a good one to talk
Great.
through.
Yeah. Where after we've given like an overview of like the contents and talked about the disciplinarity and the like intergenre, I'll segue to I'll introduce you to speak into that kind of intergenre aspect.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I can't stay for the whole thing, but I have to dash off to pick up my kids from after school club.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming, even for
and they close at 6, so I have to get there, and when I arrive right at 6, my kids are not happy. They're the last ones. They're like, "What, Mom?"
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if it's not the first time, right?
Bah oui.
Okay. So the question is always, do you start before everybody gets here? Because those who are here should be at least welcomed. Well, welcome to those who are here. Let me start with that. Give everybody another 2 minutes. That's what happens. People come in throughout. Okay. Everybody's quiet. Well, we do, yeah, say.
No. I was just going to say, Rebecca, you just use me in any way you want in terms of like pointing to different pages, etc. And and I'll get that. You can, speak and.
Yeah, likewise. You should talk about the posters in the background of your.
Yeah. Yes, I will.
Okay. Great. So I'm going to say welcome and thank you for those who are on time today. We do appreciate punctuality, but we also appreciate you joining us at any time. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much to Professor Perellis for again being part of our programming for the New Works Wednesday and the Albert Schneier Program for International Studies. So thank you very much from Yeshiva University. And thank you, of course, to our speakers today, Dr. Sami Everett, Dr. Rebekah Vince, Dr. David Haller, and Dr. Vanessa Elbaz. So thank you all, and I'm really excited for this talk. I have been waiting for this for quite a while. And so I will hand you over into the hands of Professor Perellis, and I will go to Blake.
Hi, everybody. It's really wonderful to see everyone here. I'm very excited for this event in particular. I am Professor Ronnie Perellis. I teach Jewish history at Yeshiva University, and I'm the director of the Rabbi Arthur Schneier Program in International Affairs at Yeshiva University. And it's been wonderful to partner with Drora, with the Institute for Jewish Experience at the ASF on this series. And I think with everything that's going on right now in the Middle East, taking a step back and thinking about other opportunities, other possibilities, other ways of being, I think is important. I think to dip deep into the well of history and to appreciate the complexity and the bonds that exist between peoples, and not to sugarcoat anything, and but to really kind of deal with that culture and with that social history, I think is essential. So I'm so happy to have the panelists here today, and I want to give. I only have the bios for the editors of the volume, and I'm just going to briefly introduce them. Dr. Rebekah Vince began a lectureship in French at Queen Mary University of London in September 2020, following a teaching fellowship at Durham University and an early career fellowship at the University of Warwick, where she received her PhD in 2018. She's currently transforming her thesis into a book entitled Unsettled Memories, Franco-Maghrebi Literature on the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, and working on articles developing the concept of dialogue and performance and exploring the hidden heritage of India's Jewish kingdom as represented by North African writers of French. There is so much going on in this, and it's so exciting, and I hope we get to see a little bit of this as well here today. More broadly, she's interested in the interactions between post-colonial studies and Jewish studies in relation to memories of Jewish life in the Muslim majority countries formerly colonized by France. I'm also pleased to welcome Dr. Sami Everett, or Samuel Everett, who goes by Sami. He's a research fellow at the University of Cambridge. He's also fellow and tutor at St. Edmund's College. He holds a PhD and an MPhil in politics and anthropology from SOAS, University of London, at School of Oriental and Asian Studies, correct? SOAS?
Yeah.
Yes. And a BA in North African Language and Culture from the Institut National des Langues et Civilisations Orientales in Paris. He conducts comparative research into migratory and post-migratory experiences between Jewish and Muslim groups, predominantly in France, and is currently working on a monograph provisionally entitled Maghrebinicité, North African Jewish Experience in Greater Paris since 1981. David Haller, Professor David Haller is a new friend to me, and I'm excited to learn more about his work. And Dr. Vanessa Elbaz is an old friend who I haven't seen in a long time in person, and I look forward to, and who is currently at Cambridge, correct? And many of the ASF audience knows her work, her musical work, her academic work, and without any further ado, let's get into this amazing book. And I'm excited to learn more today. Thank you so much, everybody.
Well, thank you for coming on during such strange times. And I think Rebekah, you're going to kick us off.
Yeah, and just to say that we're really glad to have David here, who did a lot of the translation work in the book, and he's going to speak to that towards the end of this little intro. And Vanessa's going to intersect in the middle as we talk about the beginnings of the project and then go on to the structure of the book and some of the themes and language issues that we kind of unpack in the book. But we thought we'd start with beginnings. So Sami and I met at Ella Shohat event, I think it was 2017, at SOAS actually, on Judeo-Arabic, where she was also selling her selected writings on the Arab Jew. And we realized that we had interests, common interests in particularly this other writer, Valerie Zanatti, who wrote the afterword for our book, which Sami translated, and which considers memories of North African Jewish life and legacies of Jewish-Muslim interactions in an autobiographical mode, but also summarizes the book as we'll look at when we look into the contents. And that initial encounter when we realized that we had these connections coming from different disciplinary backgrounds, Sami in anthropology, me more in literary studies, French studies, we then started to develop some ideas around workshops in relation to Jewish-Muslim interactions, which then went on to develop into the book and beyond that as part of this wider project exploring Jewish-Muslim interactions in performing cultures across North Africa and France. Yeah, Sami's going to speak a little bit about those workshops and the format that we chose before we go into the book that really was a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, just to touch on the kind of coincidental meeting around the work of Ella Shohat and Valerie Zanatti. The one, obviously, somebody that most people here will have heard of, Ella Shohat, who really brought into perspective kind of Mizrahim experiences and life in Israel. And then moved to New York in the US. And I think that what was particularly kind of important about her work and how it relates to this work is the fact that she questions in her new work, which is about language, which is about Judeo-lects, she questions the fact that we should put the Judeo in front of the lect. She particularly vis-a-vis Judeo-Arabic, so she sees it as a form of Arabic. So in other words, that the Arabic spoken by Jewish communities across the Middle East and the Levant were part of a wider Arabic culture, as she puts it, and in a sense, the Judeo-ness kind of carves out a specificity that wasn't necessarily there, was and wasn't, and that's the whole complexity, right? And equally, she kind of, I mean, her books and her interventions, critical interventions, have been about kind of revolved around what it is to be Sephardi, for example. Why do we use the terminology? Is that terminology tied to kind of contemporary notions of Europeanness, right? And are Sephardim European? It's a question. So we were interested in all of those different juxtapositions. And then finally, I think one of the things also that Shohat has shown is in her work on Frantz Fanon, is the conversations that Frantz Fanon had when he was developing his thinking about colonized and colonizer, was alimented, was kind of nourished by an intellectual discussion with Ali Cherki and Jacques Azoulay, both of whom Jewish Algerians, and it's interesting that kind of triangulation and that question of having experienced a position that's neither in nor out within Algeria alimented the reflections of somebody as well known as Frantz Fanon. So the workshops for us that kind of preceded this volume were really a way of bringing together all different perspectives and to bring together lots of different disciplines that we often talk about interdisciplinarity, but we wanted to really kind of try it out almost. So get the kind of have a deeper, meaningful conversation, but also to get people that aren't quite in to get involved. So we called on historians and anthropologists who aren't so familiar with Jewish studies in a sense, but who were dealing on the fringes with certain characters. So for Albert Samama, a real character at the beginning of the 20th century, a Tunisian filmmaker who used his Arabic language to get on the kind of the front line of the war between Libya and Italy. But at the same time, he used his Frenchness to sell his films, right? A historian that was looking at him, not necessarily through a Jewish studies perspective, produced a piece that opens our volume. And there are various pieces like that that punctuate the volume that we're quite proud of, in a sense, because it shows, it allows us to expand what we're doing with Jewish studies, in a sense, and not remain so Judeo-focused. So we brought people from Algeria and Morocco, Haj Miliani, Jamal, who didn't come to the first workshop. The first workshop was in Cambridge, so it was very people, I think, like being invited to Cambridge. And the second one was in Cassis, which is next to Marseille, on the Mediterranean. So that was really important for us to actually be by the Mediterranean, to actually have kind of interact in a sense whilst looking at the sea. So we were very fortunate to be sponsored by lots of different lovely institutions, European Association of Jewish Studies, La Fondation Camargo at Cassis, the IMLR, Cambridge University, Aix-Marseille University, I probably missed some, but that was a kind of really fortunate thing to be able to do, is to do not just one but two workshops and really think through. And in the second workshop, what was really lovely was the fact that we actually invited artists. So Neta El-Kayem was there with Amit, and Iris Misquet was there, who is a digital artist. So we really brought together different, not just a kind of multidisciplinarity, but also artistic culture with academic. Yeah, so sorry, I spoke too much, Rebekah, back to you.
No, definitely. I think that was one of the really exciting things, is that this book is not only multilingual, it's also got the artwork, and it's kind of got a soundtrack. Maybe we should make a Spotify playlist for it, because it's got a soundtrack and a soundscape to it, and a visuality, which was inspired by those workshops and by those vibrant dialogues and discussions that we had there. And another figure that was coming to mind as Sami was speaking, that also links Fanon and discussion about Fanon and about this, the first, potentially the first Tunisian filmmaker, Albert Samama, is Albert Memmi. And there's this quote in the book about that David had to translate, about being a métis de la colonisation, and this kind of in-betweenness, which was something that we're interrogating, or this both andness that comes with the hyphen of Arab Jew and Judeo-Arabic and Jewish Muslim in the title. So those were things that we were kind of interrogating and unpicking in those workshops, which form the basis of the structure of the book, particularly the first workshops in Cambridge, where we asked people, their contributors, including Vanessa, to give a kind of work in progress paper that could then form the basis of a dialogue, which would then feed into the finished product of the chapter, which means that there's this inherent dialogic element to the book, and a kind of contrapuntal element, which is reflected also in the interactions that we're looking at, that kind of pushing back and pushing forwards of those interactions. So maybe it would be helpful to look at kind of the contents. I think, yeah, great. So we split the book into 2 sections. So initially, accents, affiliations, and exchange. So this idea of affinity, which is explored by Jonathan Glasser, which thinks the idea of affiliation, or somewhere between filiation and affiliation. And yeah, also the idea of kind of cleaving is something that we look at in relation to this section in the introduction of this kind of bringing together and pulling apart kind of simultaneously, and that holding in tension. And yeah, there's an emphasis on kind of musical intimacy in this section, and also nationalism, but also like cross-class as well. So that's an element that is kind of peripheral to the book as well, like questions of class. And then the second section was more about absence and influence and elision, but by absence we also mean the presence of absence, the legacies of absent Jewish communities in North Africa, and how those legacies live on in music and are represented in film and art, and also this idea of elision, of being avoidance, but also of joining together, linked again to that idea of cleaving. So this is kind of exchange also, or dialogue between those 2 sections, which also highlights the kind of intergenre and interdisciplinarity element of the book that Sami touched on, and that's linked to the multi and the inter of multilingual and of intergenre. And one chapter that particularly draws us out is Vanessa's chapter, which explores music as a character in films about Jewish Muslim relationships, romantic or otherwise. And it would be great if Vanessa could share about that and share the picture as well. Thanks.
Yes, so I'm going to try to share my screen. I actually have the photo open on my screen, so we'll see. Yeah, here we go. Here it is. Yes. So I wanted to talk about just briefly about the chapter. First of all, thank you for having me on this. And so what I found interesting was I had actually in 2016, I had started this Jewish film festival in Casablanca. We had 1 edition, and it made it like this huge boom in the newspapers all over Morocco, because it said the word Jew, Jewish, juif in the title, which was like the first time that we ever had that. But what I found was that, and we had 3 films in that, with the filmmakers and all that. We had huge crowds, and one of the films was this film, L'Orchestre de Minuit, and one of the other films is also in the chapter. It was Aida, and in so many of these films that we have in Morocco, since there've been a whole series of them since about 2007 that I've seen, and then 2005 there was Leila Marrakchi's Morocco also, but music is constantly there. It's either in the title, or it's in the plot, or it's in the relationships. And whenever there's a movie about Moroccan Jews, there has to be something that has music as part of the development of the plot. And I was trying to understand that, so that for me, this chapter really gave me the chance to sink my teeth into it and look and analyze it and try to understand, like, what is going on here? Because very often we have an interreligious love affair or desire, or impossibility or something in the plot, as well as the music. However, in this film, in Jerome Cohen Olivar's film, there is no interreligious love affair, but there is this kind of brokenness of exile, the brokenness of the son's exile, this very famous musician. And here, this image that is one of the images of the poster, they had various posters, but this image is actually this dream image of this orchestra that was called the Midnight Orchestra. And it's the father's orchestra before the 67 war, and that they had to leave. And so before that rupture that happened in 67, where things became so much more difficult for the Jewish community in Morocco. And what happened to the son was that he lost his hearing after that. So it was so traumatic that, the sense of hearing was gone. And it was only after he came back to Morocco and his father passed away, and that he has all these experiences. One of them is this very image of this kind of like dream moment inside the water where he's drowning, and all of a sudden he sees the orchestra coming out of the water, and then his ears open up here. So it's there's so many layers of metaphors and of pain and of unification and of disruption that are being told in this film in a very, it's a comedy. So, and they got one of the most famous Moroccan comedy actors to play the sidekick, right, of the son. And it really demonstrates this aspect that I then analyzed further, which is this diegetic aspect in music, and this aspect of music is a very embodied character. So we have the Muslim, we have the Jew, they're both Moroccan, and we have the music, and it's the music that actually serves as this catalyst, as this connector, as this social glue, in the words of Solomon, right? As this other character that actually acts in the process to further move the dynamic. Because when music isn't there, then we have all the other noises that invade, right? The noises from outside, from the noises from the Middle East, the noises from Pan-Arabism, the noises from Zionism, all of the noises that invade that sonic sanctuary. But when we have the sound, then there's unification. There's that moment of dream, and the sound is almost like the water inside his dream. So it's almost as if this sound envelope is as if you're underwater in a different space, in a different, it's a different vector of reality.
Yeah, and just to mention that Vanessa is one of the 4 chapters that's been made freely accessible online. That's something that we really push for accessibility, so that, yeah, if you're interested in what you heard, which I'm sure you are, you can check out her chapter, her full chapter online with its filmography as well, if you haven't watched those films already. So yeah, that was one of the things in the book that we wanted to engage with, the kind of multi-genre, so film, music, also street art, stand-up comedy, and really see these as interactions rather than relations. So to quote from our introduction, Jewish Muslim relations are often reduced to tensions surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as transposed and played out on French soil. Hence our emphasis on Jewish Muslim interactions in an attempt to chart an alternative trajectory. Ronnie at the beginning was talking about these other ways of being and these alternative trajectories or forgotten futures. centered on performing cultures in North Africa and France. So we wanted to draw away from conflictual or nostalgic narratives of the past, which pit Jews and Muslims against each other or depict past experiences of relatively peaceful coexistence in like irremediable terms. And we also wanted to move away from the more diplomatic, institutionalized manipulation of the word relations, which is linked to this French concept of vivre ensemble or living together, coexisting, which is kind of twisted in the comedy of Younessi Bambi, which is explored in Adi Barrett's chapter, where he talks instead of vivre ensemble about rire ensemble, so this kind of idea of laughing together, which also includes laughing at the self and laughing at each other within the space of comedy and performance and performing each other's identities and interrogating those. So that's kind of a note on some of the things that we put out in the introduction, which are more to do with kind of terminology, and linked to that is moving away as well from this idea of a francophonie, of this kind of, this kind of colonial hangover, basically, which creates this false distinction between France as kind of the metropole in the center and the space where French is truly French or authentic French, and instead broadens out this idea of Francospheres. So I work for a journal called Francosphere, actually, with an accent, which is really trying to see French as a kind of sphere in like a Venn diagram of languages, of cultures, of identities, and really resonates with a translation project that I've been involved in, translating a collection of essays called Une enfance juive au Méditerranée musulmane, a Jewish childhood in the Muslim Mediterranean, where one of the stories speaks of a triple coexistence of Jewish, Algerian, and French, or Hebrew, Arabic, and French. And that kind of idea of these overlapping spheres, rather than looking at the Maghrib, or actually Maghrib, as Sami can speak into, as this kind of francophone space, just defining it by its colonial past.
I just wanted to say my screen crashed, so the contents went away, but I'm just going to bring back the contents page of the book. Just bear with me. You can see that, right? Yeah. So Vanessa spoke to the piece, the part in which she wrote, so on absence, influence, and elision, and that it speaks to, I guess, the question of a present absence in terms of a Jewish absence, whilst simultaneously being present through various mediated forms and cultural forms, but also, of course, histories that are remembered. But I think also this part of the book also speaks to kind of a remodeling across generations, which was something that I hold very dear. Whereas there's a kind of a different logic to the first part, which is more about reappropriating the memory of some of the people and personages that have been lost in the passage, from North Africa to Europe and the Americas and Israel, but also lost for other reasons, such as the chapter that I worked on about Marie Soussan. So Marie Soussan is this actress, djerbuka player, singer. She's related to one of the kind of virtuoso shiur sheikhs of Andalusi music, Edmond Nathan Yafil. And she hooks up with an actor from early Algerian theatre called Rachid Qasantini, and they have this kind of love affair that Vanessa was talking about, this kind of illicit love affair, but it's also quite public because they're both actors. So it shatters taboos in many of the ways that we know that actors and cultural producers tend towards. But in this first part, we also have the memory of Albert Samama, who Morgane Coriou, the writer, reappropriates, that David translated also. Lili Labassi, Chris Silver writes about the records of Labassi, Mesika, and how they tapped into this nationalist paradigm of the time, and the irony seen with our presentist eyes of the fact that Jewish composers could kind of actually create the music that nationalism rode on, that Arab nationalism rode on, seems quite fantastic now. Ruth's chapter about Bishiri. And there's also another fantastic chapter by Fanny Gillet, if you see one from page 121, Free but United, and her chapter is about the kind of complexity of the art world, so the world of painters in Tunisia and Algeria in particular, and the fact that they're shot through with these different tendencies and influences, or autochthonous and European modern, and that they don't have the same kind of access to the art market or to the grandes écoles of art, yeah, so there's a question of kind of reappropriating the memory of many different personages that we've forgotten about for various reasons in the first section. And the second section is more about, I think there's an intergenerational dynamic that's very important in the second part. So to speak to that very briefly, I thought that maybe I could read a tiny little bit of the last section of the book, the afterword, and so I'll just bring my Zoom back so I can actually see people. I think it speaks to translation too, so maybe David, you can speak after this, because I translated Valérie. So Valérie Zenati, for those of you who don't know her, is she's an author born in Nice in the early 70s. She emigrated with her family when she was young, kind of 12, 13, early teens. Her mother was from Tunisia, her father was from Constantine. And she's written a lot about the question of feeling kind of torn between different identities, and in a sense, she's also written about the fact that the predominant Jewish identity in France is that of the Ashkenazi memory, and so she always kind of felt slightly out of place coming from a North African family, which I think resonates with Israel also, yeah, so she has an interesting relationship with language. She's a hébraïsante, as we say, so she speaks Hebrew very well. She translates Aharon Appelfeld into French, but she's written also about her Algerian family. Yeah, so she says, I'll read it in French and then in English. If that's okay. I mean, yeah, it's not very long, so that's fine. So she says, Le Kef, Tunis, Miliana, Alger, Constantine n'ont pas été pour moi des points géographiques que je pouvais situer sur une carte. Ils étaient le décor invisible des souvenirs de ceux qui m'ont précédé et dont les vies ont abouti à la mienne, comme tant d'autres nés en France, de parents français, et qui portaient en eux une mémoire africaine, nord-africaine, dont les échos dans la France des années 70 résonnaient de folklore, de caricature, du mépris des uns, de la fierté des autres et du refoulé d'autres encore. Comment admettre et transmettre l'unité de ceux qui avaient volé en éclats? So this is the question that she asks. How can we transmit this memory that is so complex and interlaced? So my poor translation, David will speak to you about how to translate well in a dysglossic context. For me, Le Kef, Tunis, these are all places, Miliana, Algiers, and Constantine were not so much geographical nodes, dots that I could point out on a map, as the invisible decor of the memories of those who came before me and whose lives led to my own. Just like many others born in France of French parents who hold within them an African history, a North African history, the echoes, at least within the context of 1970s France, resonating with folklore, stereotypes, disdain for some, pride for others, and repression for others still. Yeah, so she also talks about the ways in which her family, particularly her parents and her grandparents, impregnate their language with Arabic, and that is a completely, that her generation is completely abstracted from that. So I figured that maybe that would create a bridge for David to talk, in the personal, as a translator, as somebody who is constantly translating, presumably translating cultures, who's in Genève and dealing with sources in Hebrew and English. This question of intergenerational transmission, which I think is really important to this volume. And the fact that David is translated much of the material for me was a real plus, because he had a sort of personal perspective on it, if you like. So do you want to, you don't necessarily need to speak to that, but whatever, I'm sure you've had some thoughts.
Sure, no, thanks for having me, and I'm very happy to be here. Let me just begin by clarifying a technical point. I am not yet a doctor nor a professor, although I hope to be one day. I am currently a PhD candidate in Geneva. And let me start by saying, by telling you how this project met me in a very fortuitous and a very significant, in retrospect, kind of way. At the time, I was living in Belleville in Paris, and where I had moved in the summer of 2016 from Israel, after having spent a few very intensive years studying history and exploring my Mizrahi identity, notably in Tel Aviv's at the time burgeoning poetry scene, Ars Poetica, if some of you know. And all of that kind of stopped abruptly when I left for Paris, and I was frantically trying to learn French when I came. I tell to people I knew bonjour, baguette, and Tour Eiffel, pretty much. And when I heard of this project first through a friend of mine who is an actual real deal translator, Joël Merelli, I did not realize how this kind of project could weave together a few of the strands of my life that were just laying around at the time. I happened, even before Sami and I ever spoke, I happened to talk to one of the contributors in the book, one of whose chapter I ended up translating, Milena, And Milena and I spent a very long and memorable evening drinking wine and talking about how insufficient, in a way, or how frustrating the Mizrahi revolution, quote unquote, the latest one, I would say there are a few, turned out to be, in its being blocked within the Israeli grammar and politics of Ashkenazi and Mizrahi, sort of mirroring black and white activism elsewhere. And I knew that that there was a past beyond the state, both in time and in space. And I have read of it, but I think part of it, of the inaccessibility, I think, of it, and here I really like what Vanessa said earlier in terms of she spoke of an audio sanctuary or a sound sanctuary that is protected from being drowned out by other sounds, and I knew that this existed, and I think that through this volume and working together with Sami and with Rebekah, I had a very deep plunge and prolonged plunge into that, and my work was that of the academic lumpen proletariat, translating, and I want to say that it has been a very real pleasure working with Sami and Rebekah, since they have honestly and fully taught me a lot in working on it. I think that in certain important ways, a good translator is a translator you barely feel, and it's an exercise in not speaking of yourself. So in this way, I'm being a very bad translator right now, and I think that a lot of the finer points or the grace in some of the passages is definitely thanks to them and their working with them, and it wouldn't have happened without them. That being said, I think that the fact that we are doing this séance and the book itself are hidden a bit behind paywalls is a problem, that we don't speak enough of it. I think I looked at the book, and I'm not pointing any fingers or anything, but I think the book is one of the outrageously priced academic books, and that is very unfair to my mind, because this is a book that deserves as wide a possible readership as possible. And in a way, my job in this outfit was perhaps doing something like Albert Samama was doing in juggling languages, because if you think about it, English was not a native language to these worlds that we are describing in any way, shape, or form, and we only translate them, the text, into English because that is the lingua franca of the academic world. And I think that in that, we glimpse these worlds through the shutters that open and close very quickly, and it's the shutters of time and of language and of mediation. And as a translator, I felt that the best work I could do was to provide as long a shutter opening as I could for people to see it. And I hope that people read this, and I hope that every translator gets the opportunity to really work on something that is deeply involved, that he's deeply and personally involved in emotionally as well. I'm a hyphenated man. I'm not Dr. Haller. I'm David Mosafi Haller. And this is a hyphenated project, and I'm very happy to be working on this.
Thanks, David.
Could I suggest, David, would you want to give an example of that extended shutter that you were talking about? Could you give an example of that from the translation? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I just that image was so provocative, and maybe it could give us a little taste of the project a little bit. Like I said, I don't want to put you on the spot. I mean, I'm putting you on the spot.
I'm thinking of perhaps one part from Milena's chapter, which I translated without even having seen Kamal Khashkar's film Dans tes yeux, je vois mon pays. And at close to the end, she describes a scene there which occurs in Hebrew in Neta Al-Kayam's living room. Or recording session living room. And Kamal taught himself Hebrew, and he speaks Hebrew with an accent that any Israeli would say, oh, he's foreign, but I'm not very clear where from. And the exchange happens while I believe he asks her, where's your home? You know, where do you see yourself to be home? And she has a very emotional and beautiful reaction. And in translating that, I suddenly realized that a lot of the beauty of the scene, to my mind, is in the language of it and the place of it. And in rendering it in English, there are several ways that I can choose from. And I think I spent an entire day or two with this, mulling this over my head, and I'm not certain that whatever result ended up on the page was a definitive one. I don't think there is one, but I think that trying to keep the shutters open as long as possible was just trying to kind of conserve that complexity in that situation.
Yeah, it's interesting because Milena's chapter was very unlike all of the rest. She wrote as a poet, as an artist. She just wrote from the heart. So it wasn't structured in the same way as the expectations of an academic paper. And it flowed in a different way, and so there was also, you were contending with that also, the fact that this was, in the same way as Valérie Zenati kind of draws on a Derridien endlessness of the text. There is no end to the text. You know, there's no punctuation. There's no capital letters, right? And the text flows. And that in English, which is structured very differently, which has a very different syntax, is a real challenge as well, right? And it shows the degree to which our minds are set differently when we move between languages as well, right?
Something that came across. Sorry, just to tie into that, something that came across in your translation of Valérie Zenati as well was how to translate on. There's kind of, do you say one? Do you say we? Do you say I? Do you say you? How much do you involve the reader in that? When she's writing and Sami's channeling that in English about these different generational moments, or these different moments of growth and recognition and memory, which she also explores in a short kind of auto/biographical book about translation as well, and about her role as a translator of Aharon Appelfeld, who becomes like the Holocaust surviving grandfather that she never had, and that she pretends that she has when she moves to Israel as this kind of outsider, insider, but in a different way to Ella Shohat, who as an Israeli Iraqi American or Iraqi Israeli American, and yeah, that was one element as well that we wanted to bring out, this kind of idea of like affiliative memory of kind of which comes through in Valerie Zanatti's relationship with Aaron Appelfeld, which actually is the inspiration for her writing about her own family, but she has to go via his story and via the collective memory of the Holocaust to access the story of her great uncle, Jacob, which she writes about in this book, Jacob, which Sami and I spoke about when we first met, because Sami wrote a review of it, I think, for Journal of North African Studies. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, and that re-articulation, a double articulation of her great uncle's name, who fought to liberate France, but wasn't buried or remembered in either Algeria, where he was born, or France, where he died. So this double articulation of her name. And I think that's something we're also doing in the book, is this articulation of that which may have been silenced or taboo.
I mean, David, I'm gonna try and do some self-defense here. So, I mean, it is contentious. You're absolutely right, and it's about markets. So your whole piece about being a lumpenproletariat is spot on the money, to not be ironic. But yeah, and so we write into English, and we translate everything into English. But we kind of really grappled with that and tried to keep Hebrew in there, to keep Arabic in there, to keep the script in there, right? Regardless of whether or not people can read it, So make them feel like they can't read it, and then they'll understand how it feels, to be on the other side of that, that was something that and you can't keep it all because of that logic of having to translate, right? Because it has to be fluid and it has to. So it was something that we really, really kind of grappled with, and I think our kind of conversations on the side, like you said, you're a quiet translator when you're doing the work, the kind of keyboard work, right? But the conversations that go on the side is something else. I wanted to try and tie a question from Monique in the comments about humor and this conversation about translation. So in Chris Silver's chapter, which like I said is about it's about nationalist songs, or songs that get appropriated by various different independentist movements in Tunisia, Algeria, and so forth. And one of them is a song by Lili Labassi, okay? And it's not, Chris says it's not his intention to be at all nationalist. Part of the song goes like this. So I'll give the Arabic and the English, and then I'll kind of give why in the end it's actually slightly humorous, right? So it's by Lili Labassi. It's called Lillah Yalghidi L'Sahara. By God, O you who is going to the Sahara. Yalghidi li blad al-Ghazal. O you who is going to the land of the gazelles. إذا لقيت لغزالي, if you find my gazelle. قل له مازال. Tell him he's still alive. غير ما يحلى لي. No one can replace him for me. لله يلغدي للصحارى شوف لي غزال. So if you go to the Sahara, by God, if you go to the Sahara, find my gazelle. And now so talking of translation, what happens, right? The French military, so this is fascinating, right? The French military are tracking all of this musical production, right? And their Arabists are looking at how, what's the subtext? What's the hidden script? What's actually being said here? And they find that this Moroccan nationalist, El Fessi, who has been basically deported to the Sahara. It's all about that, they say, and so they get really worried, you know. And then this song goes viral. I mean, literally, you know, it goes completely viral. Everybody's got it, bootlegged, all the rest of it, and then they realize they can't retract the song, and he says, "That's nothing to do with this nationalist guy. This is you know, it's nothing to do with Al-Fassi. It's from an old qasida, like an old piece of Arabic poetry, and so in a sense, this question of, you know, this is completely lost in translation in a sense, you know, the paranoia of wanting to find something, so a kind of kernel of politics, of nationalism in it, means that they incorrectly translate it effectively, right? They interpret it or maybe not. But I guess the point is there's the humor, that kind of, there's a humor, there's kind of an innate humor in there. There's a kind of self, and that he's aware of this is like, there's this kind of self-derision in there. Like he's keenly aware that his song gets appropriated in this way, both by people who are listening and thinking, well, maybe he's talking about that, and the military who are really concerned that this song has gone viral, right? And this is going to become a nationalist anthem, right? And this is going to lead to further independence movements. So I think there's something about the self-derision that relates strongly to your question, Monique, that you put in the chat about, you know, Maghribi humor. It's kind of laughing at this set of circumstances that is so absurd, but so structurally oppressive as well. You know, really your songs are looked at in that kind of a way. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if that's an answer, but it's a thought at least.
And even his wife thought that the song was an allusion to him. There's this great line where trouvant dans ce chant une allusion à l'éloignement au tafaïlet de son mari, finding in the song an allusion to her husband's removal to Tafilat, this region at the edge of the Sahara. And then Chris writes, no longer just a problem of the French imagination that's just concocted this. Those Moroccan Muslims closest to the nationalist movement believed that an Algerian Jew was articulating their aspirations. And the chapter goes on to look at other instances of that nationalism being articulated by North African Jewish musicians.
Yeah, and I just thinking aloud in the chapter that Haj Miliani and I wrote about Marie Soussan and Rachel Qasantini. So the kind of short version of the story is that because she's a woman living in 1920s Algiers, her acting, her singing, her production of scripts, so plays, is not taken seriously, right? So she kind of channels. So Qasantini, her partner, channels her, right? And they become. What's interesting is that they're a very kind of feisty couple, and they fight a lot. They're always fighting, you know, waiting in the wings to go on stage. They're fighting, but they stay together. They stay together until he dies, right? So they're also, you know, that fighting obviously has some kind of positive effects. And in the memoirs of Bashtarzi, who's like one of the founders of Algerian theatre, he writes about how Rachid Qasantini kind of says, well, she can't write. So basically, she is illettrée. She can't write Arabic. You know, she can't read or write Arabic. She acts in Arabic. She can't read or write Arabic. So this relates to language also. She can speak it, no problem. She can act scenes, no problems. But she learns everything off by heart, right? So there's also this question of oralité that's omnipresent in it's kind of this early Nahda period Arabic culture is often from, like, in the same way as that song comes from a qasida that's remembered by generations and generations. In this instance, she can't read or write Arabic. Rashid Qasantini, as a man, as a Muslim man, he can. And so he says, basically, I articulate her thoughts many times. Anyway, they go on to write, and I fully kind of buy that. They go on to write this piece called Aisha and Bendu. Aisha and Bendu. So he's presumably Bendu and she's presumably Aisha. But anyway, Aisha and Bendu is all about a warring couple, right? It's like a couple that's always fighting. And so Aisha and Bendu is like, has entered into the Algerian language, so Derija, like the spoken form of Arabic spoken in Algeria, as a way to say a warring couple, right? And this is a 1920s relative, I mean, not world famous, Jewish Muslim couple who both from quite humble origins. Yeah, and so again, we're back to that culture that is shared, that is all of ours, that is also invisible. You know, nobody knows that Aisha and Bendu comes from that expression comes from their couple and what they produced and what that couple meant, and so it's fascinating that even within the language that we use, those absences are there. Yeah.
That there's so much recovery, that work that you guys are doing, and this question of things that you lose in translation, but you find them in translation. You create, first of all, you create a bigger audience for them, or a different audience for them, a newer audience for them. But in the act of translating, and I mean that in the most metaphorical way possible, you're literally taking it out of its locality and putting it into a space which is the space where a lot of the people who once lived in these places, they don't live there anymore, right? And their culture has spread, for all sorts of reasons, right? It's not all bad reasons why people leave their homes, but that longing, that desire for memory, and the creativity that happens with memory. I think you guys are doing such important work on it, and I we're at the a little bit over the hour, and I just want to thank you for this work that's really a work of care and love and respect, and takes a lot of time to get down into it and to do it right, and I hope we can continue learning from you all. And thank you for coming on. We have time for maybe one question from the audience? If there's one, there were a few that we already addressed that were in the chats, but I don't want, if someone is here and has a question. But if not, I just, on behalf of American Sephardi Federation and Shiva University and Dror and myself, I really thank you for coming on, and thank you for sharing this work, and thank you for doing this work. And we hope to see each other in New York, or Tel Aviv, or Paris, or somewhere wonderful, and in due time. All right, thank you very much, everybody. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Really fascinating stuff. And I look forward to jumping into this. I happen to have a nice amount of students of North African origin, and I often encourage them to do something close to home. And so it's good to know. I'll be bugging you guys for references for things in the future. Okay, so thank you so much. All right, and good to meet you all. And David, you could keep the doctorate. It's okay, or the professor.
Honorary, yeah.
Like I said, for a little money, I can get you maybe smicha, and it'll be.
I miss that.
Yeah. All right, everybody.
Thanks so much, Ronnie.
Thank you, Drora. I know Drora had some technical issues in the middle. I hope that's the least of it tonight, Drora.
I hope so too. I'm so sorry. Now I'm really glad that we get to post it now because I'm going to go back and watch it because
Exactly.
I missed half of it. So
Yeah.
thank you all. And thank you for those who are coming. And there's a big question there, so we'll have to address it next time. Because it's
we just got this. Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a big one.
But Albert will come back for another one and we will definitely address it again.
Sorry, I just saw this now. It's a great question. It's a powerful question. Wow.
Elena's chapter speaking to this.
Oh, there you go. Excellent.
Great.
So, and that one's not online, right? That one.
Not yet. We're working on making it fully free.
Okay.
Yeah, you can watch the film that it's based on, In Your Eyes I See My Country, Dante's Je vois mon pays, which David referred to earlier.
Excellent.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.